It seems to me that most ancient civilizations and the thinkers who created them wouldn't last 5 minutes on today's internet. Some of their blunt opinions about other peoples would see them banned from every platform and hauled into court under modern hate speech laws. So in this video, I'm going to let those voices speak for themselves. Listen to what the ancients actually wrote about ethnicity and hierarchy, then tell me in the comments, am I exaggerating, or would these venerable sages be booted offline and possibly arrested if they tweeted the same things today? Welcome to the cradle of Western civilization, classical Greece. Here, a single city-state experimented with democracy, formalized geometry under Pythagoras, invented drama, codified logic, and laid the philosophical bedrock we still stand on today. On natural slavery, he who is by nature not his own but another's man is by nature a slave, and he may be said to be another's man who, being a human being, is also a possession, politics. On Hellenes ruling barbarians, hence it is evident that it is just for Greeks to rule over barbarians, but not for barbarians to rule over Greeks, since the former are by nature slaves, while the latter are by nature free. Politics. Aristotle says that non-Greek barbarians are slaves by nature because of their ethnic background, not by accident or bad luck. So the people he referred to would have been Asians such as the Persians, Phrygians, Lydians, Phoenicians, subjects of the Persian great king and his satraps. In the North African fringe, the Egyptians or Carthaginians sometimes lumped in as barbarian subjects of monarchs, and in Europe the Thracians, Scythians, fierce, but in Aristotle's later theory, lacking in intelligence, and thus fit only for simple obedience. Some peoples are born to be slaves, and Greeks should rule barbarians. Can you imagine him writing this today in Britain? By lunch, #CancelAristotle is trending, his blue tick's gone, PayPal has frozen his account for extremist activity, and the Crown Prosecution Service is weighing a hate speech charge under UK law. So why did Aristotle hold this ideology? Aristotle is attempting to find a place for slavery into his entire worldview of purpose, hierarchy, and the proper ordering of society. His idea that blood and birth fix destiny is the intellectual bridge to the 19th century writers we'll meet next. Aristotle sees everything from soul over body to man over beast as a set of ruler and ruled pairs. Society is no exception. If one group possesses logos, reason, in full, and another possesses only enough to understand commands, nature itself has signalled who should command and who should obey. For him, every being has a built-in purpose. If a person's highest function is physical labour, nature has already assigned his role. Greek citizens needed leisure to participate in politics. Large numbers of non-citizen labourers made that possible. Calling the arrangement natural justifies the social order. Also, 4th century Greeks had recently fended off Persian invasion and saw themselves as the pinnacle of civilization. Equating Greek with rational flattered that self-image. Lastly, critics in his own day, such as Alcidamas, quoted in Aristotle's discussion, argued that nature made no man a slave. Aristotle responds by doubling down on biology, arguing that differences of birth outweigh abstract ideals of freedom. So what would we call this ideology today? In today's political vocabulary, Aristotle's view lines up most closely with ethnic supremacism wrapped in an aristocratic authoritarian worldview. It isn't exactly fascism, as there is no mass mobilization state cult or conservatism, no appeal to established tradition for its own sake, and it certainly isn't communism or democracy. In modern shorthand, you'd call it ethno-aristocratic supremacism, a belief that your DNA and ethnicity hardwire people for permanent master and servant roles. Imagine having that on your X profile. One of the issues that I've thought about recently is that Aristotle still gets a marble statue in every philosophy faculty, is seen as one of the greatest minds we've known. And yet, when a later thinker believes the same ideology that blood equals destiny, logic, he was damned as dangerous. Arthur de Gobineau, though, and academics file him under Proto-NS, the man whose essay on the inequality of the human races supposedly paved the road to 20th century racism. Yet Gobineau is repeating the same tune. Colour is vitally bound up with race, climate change is nothing, and the fate of every empire turns on the purity of its Aryan blood. Swap Aristotle's Hellenes versus barbarians for Gobineau's Aryans versus mixed breeds and the melody is identical. Only the modern verdict flips from marble pedestal to intellectual pariah. Aristotle's blood destiny idea never really died. Later writers just changed the words and called it science. The physical characteristics of the human race, such as the colour of the skin, the hair, and the eyes, are not affected by climate. They are inherent in the race itself. Arthur de Gobineau, an essay on the inequality of the human races. Where Aristotle divided Greeks and barbarians, Gobineau swaps in Aryan and mixed breeds, same meaning, new vocabulary. 4 decades later, Houston Stewart Chamberlain claimed in the foundations of the 19th century that history itself proves the Aryans are preeminent among all peoples. For that reason, they are by right the lords of the world. Researchers such as William Ridgway tried to confirm this by measuring skulls and comparing their weights to ancient coins, while Georges Vacher de la Puge sorted head shapes into charts that ranked which groups were destined to command. They all argued the same thing: civilization depends on biology, purity produces progress, mixture produces decline, and ruling is justified by ancestry. Eradicate the timeline and both arguments hinge on the same axle: birth fixes destiny. Aristotle framed it as a philosophical hierarchy. Hellenes possess full reason logos, barbarians do not, therefore rule and servitude are natural. Gobineau and the later race theorists dress the idea in biology, skull shapes, skin tone, Aryan purity, then claim scientific knowledge for the same conclusion. The main difference is the packaging. Aristotle speaks the language of virtue and civic order, so modern classrooms file him under classical thought, while Gobineau, Chamberlain, Ridgway, and Lapuge invoke measuring tapes and racial charts, a vocabulary forever tied to 20th century atrocities. Content-wise, there is little daylight. That contrast says more about our shifting cultural verdicts than about any real gap in the logic itself. That's how it looks to me as an outside observer. If I'm missing a nuance, if there's a genuine ethical or logical gap I haven't spotted, let me know in the comments. I'm presenting the material, not endorsing it. Chamberlain's Teutonic ideology isn't new. Rome's most quoted ethnographer had already laid out these ideas. In Germania, Tacitus praises the tribes beyond the Rhine. The tribes of Germany are free from all taint of intermarriage with foreign nations, and appear as a distinct unmixed race, like none but themselves. Hence too, the same physical peculiarities throughout so vast a population. All have fierce blue eyes, red hair, huge frames, fit only for a sudden exertion. He then explains how that unmixed status is enforced by turning the marriage bed into a test of racial loyalty. They guard the marriage bed with the strictest care. No part of their manners is more praiseworthy. If a woman is convicted of adultery, her husband cuts off her hair, strips her, and whips her through the village. Then, in the presence of her kinsman, he drives her from his house and whips her on beyond the boundaries of the settlement. Tacitus Germania Tacitus connects this brutality directly to the blood purity he applauds in an unmixed race can stay that way only by policing intercourse with absolute severity. The logic is identical to Gobineau's and Chamberlain's purity safeguards, virtue, mixture spells, decline. Yet Tacitus still appears on classics reading lists with no warning label. Same claim, different millennium. What changes is our verdict on the speaker, not the argument itself. Most of us who are into history have a fascination with ancient Egypt. Many people call it the longest running civilization on Earth. Podcasts from Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan to Charlotte Booth on the History Hit Network swap theories about lost technologies, star-aligned pyramids, and mummies whose DNA might rewrite human prehistory. Egypt is modern pop culture's gold standard for mystery and conspiracy. But guess what? People never seem to talk about Egypt's own inscriptions that some would consider extreme. Barricading outsiders isn't some 21st century brainwave dreamt up by Trump wall memes. 4,000 years ago, the pharaohs were already on it. A Middle Kingdom inscription explains, with zero subtlety, the Egyptians created a well-protected border strong enough to withstand any type of attack from the southern region. The reward of protection brought a wealth of imported resources and exposed the Egyptians' fear of the vile Cushites in Nubia. Egyptian epithet 𝐾𝐨 that appears in the Stela text. Same playbook, different millennium, build a barrier, trumpet the economic payoff, and call the neighbours vile. If modern activists call border fences a new wave of xenophobia, remind them the Nile had a checkpoint long before Hadrian, let alone Homeland Security. Modern-day hardliners love to posture about getting tough on borders, but compared with the pharaohs, they look positively squeamish. Thutmose III's year 47 victory stellar brags, without a press secretary in sight, who carries out a massacre of the Bedouin tribes of Asia, who overthrows the rebels among the Bedouin, who smites the nomads of Nubia, who reach the limits of the foreign lands of those who attacked him. In other words, don't just stop the caravans, wipe them out, chase the survivors to the edge of the map, and carve the whole story in stone so everyone knows exactly why Egypt stays pure and shining. The inscription isn't tactical detail, it's ideological flex. Purity, prosperity, and national glory all ride on one principle. Outsiders who press too close get obliterated. Even Egypt's bureaucratic paperwork is more brutal than today's border speeches. Senwosret III nails the rules to a granite slab, in order that no Nubian whatsoever shall pass the border, whether travelling downstream or on foot or in a Nubian boat, except any Nubian who comes to do business at 𝐼𝐶𝐿. So, 0 entry for migrants, 1 narrow lane for merchants, an old kingdom version of papers please plus a single entry trade visa. 8 years later, the same king adds a character reference that makes modern rhetoric look polite. They are not men of worth. They are wretches with broken hearts. His Majesty has seen it. There is no exaggeration. So, Nubians are officially not men, just broken, worthless outsiders. Compare that to a 21st century manifesto about secure borders. Ancient Egypt's policy wasn't detain and process, it was permanent exclusion, backed by a royal verdict on the very humanity of the people kept out. Same border logic, but dialed to maximum and smashed into stone for eternity. Ancient India had the same idea. The laws of Manu 200 BC warn, by adultery committed by persons of different classes, kingdoms are ruined. The offspring are censurable. Buller, Book 10. Caste purity was everything to them. Mix blood, and you destroy empires, the same as Egypt's pure and shining ideal. This blood and destiny logic runs through the medieval Islamic world too. Ibn Khaldun, court vizier, North African judge, and, ironically, lionized in modern sociology, seen as the father of civilization cycles. He opens his Muqaddimah with an ethnic verdict as blunt as anything Aristotle ever penned. Therefore, the Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery, because Negroes have little that is essentially human and possess attributes that are quite similar to those of dumb animals, as we have stated. The Muqaddimah, the rationale, he says, is climate. The inhabitants of the regions that are far from temperate are characterized by extreme heat, which burns their skin until it is black. Because of this heat, their bodies and temperaments become lethargic and their intellects are less keen than those who live in the middle zones. The Muqaddimah. So why this climate calculus? Ibn Khaldun wants a grand law of nature explanation for why some groups dominate and others serve, exactly Gobineau's project, minus skull calipers and plus desert geography. Swap burning heat for degenerate blood and the melody is identical. Harsher environment, darker skin, weaker intellect, rightful subordination. Yet, scholars, professors and online educators frequently refer to Ibn Khaldun's cyclical model of civilization. Post those 3 sentences on X today and watch the moderation bots light up like a Marrakech bazaar at sunset. Same hierarchy, different millennium, only our verdict on the messenger has changed. The point is made. Across continents and millennia, some of history's most celebrated intellects and empires wrapped their worldview around one blunt axiom: birth fixes destiny, outsiders degrade it. I'm not endorsing any of it. I'm showing that the same museums, school syllabuses, and marble statues that celebrate great thinkers quietly archive rhetoric that would get you demonetized, deplatformed, or hauled into court if you posted it on X today. The double standards matters because when discussion of uncomfortable facts is policed rather than debated, 3 things happen. Truth is destroyed. We can't trace how ideas evolve or mutate into atrocities if quoting them is taboo. Resentment festers. People sense the gap between what the archives hold and what they're allowed to say, and they look for darker corners of the internet to vent. Pressure builds. Ignore a fault line long enough and it ruptures. History shows it's better to release steam than wait for an explosion. So here's my final plea for honesty in history and absolute freedom of speech. We'll only inch toward genuine peace when we talk openly about human difference and its long, messy record, admits its cruelties, weighs its arguments, and keeps them in daylight where they can be tested. Bury the past under content warnings, and we bury the very tool that lets us learn from it